I guess I'm today's last speaker, so I don't know if they saved the best for last, or by this time you'd be so tired you wouldn't notice how terrible I am. On that topic, there's been so many great speeches that as I've waited my turn, I've been focusing on them, and I might have forgotten my own, but I'm going to do my best here. So my talk is called Taming Alcohol's Dark Side, but before I begin that, I'd like for us to consider humankind's relationship with matter. Now, I know that's kind of a strange topic to think about. What do you mean, humankind's relationship with matter? But if you think about your daily activities, when you wake up, when you drink a coffee, when you get in a car, when you fill up its gas tank, when you take every breath of air, when you eat food at lunch, you're interacting with matter. And there's a sense in which you have a relationship with that matter. I think the best picture for this is to consider humankind's relationship with fire. Now, generally, people would say that fire is a good thing because of the potential which it contains. On the one hand, fire can cook food for a starving person. It can provide light in the darkness. During the winter, it can warm our homes. And finally, via combustion, it can power huge vehicles like this locomotive. But what's interesting about fire, and most matter in particular, is that the same potential for good that it has can also be a potential for destruction. So the same fire that can provide food for a living organism can burn down a forest and kill that living organism. The same fire that can warm our homes in the winter can destroy our homes. And finally, the same fire that can provide power for our vehicles can also cause them to explode. And so what I'm trying to get at here is that humans' relationship with matter is good. It's always good because of the potential that it has, but it's good or bad whether humans are in control of it or not. Ayn Rand, now she's a little bit of a controversial figure these days, given that the whole Libertarian Party usually quotes from her. But she has a great quote where she spells this out. She says, "I like to think of fire held in a man's hand. Fire, a dangerous force tamed at his fingertips. I often wonder about the hours when a man sits alone, watching the smoke of a cigarette, thinking. I wonder what great things have come from such hours. When a man thinks, there's a spot of fire alive in his mind, and it is proper that he should have the burning point of a cigarette as his one expression." So what I love about this quote is that Ayn Rand is getting at this idea that mankind has tamed matter, particularly fire, for his own good benefit. And if you know Ayn Rand's philosophy very well, then you can make sense of the rest of the quote, where she's essentially saying, it's fitting that as a man smokes a cigarette, fire tamed at his fingertips, he's thinking about ways he could go tame other things in creation and matter for his own purposes. But what I also love about this quote is the irony in it. If you know Ayn Rand's story very well, then you would know that a few decades after she gave that quote and a few decades of smoking, she almost died of lung cancer. And she had to have a life-saving surgery to remove parts of her lungs to save her life. And so that's the tricky part about humans' relationship with matter. Even when we think we're in control of it, like Ayn Rand controlling fire in the form of a cigarette in between her fingertips, there's a sense when it can sometimes not be in control and can come back to enslave us in the end. For the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like for us to consider humankind's relationship with alcohol. Now, I know all of us know what alcohol is, but just to bracket this in broad strokes, we could ask the question, what is alcohol? So alcohol is essentially a drug that acts as a psychoactive depressant. It's been around forever. It's been found in historical literature as early as even the oldest books in the Bible. Without getting too scientific here, its primary method of action is by binding to the GABA receptor in the brain, which is the inhibition receptor, and this provides the user with levels of inhibition correlated to the amount consumed. 60% of Americans have reported using it within the last month. Another way to say that is 60% of Americans drink alcohol monthly. And finally, it's the second most used drug in the world, second to only caffeine. And so like fire, I want us to get the sense that alcohol is good because of the potential that it has. On the one hand, using alcohol in the presence of friends and family can allow us to focus on that interaction more. Using alcohol can also be used as a means to help supplement a celebration, such as at a wedding. And finally, alcohol can be used as a means for relaxation. So generally, what we could say is the way that alcohol is doing this is by being a depressant and by acting on this inhibition receptor. When you drink a little bit of alcohol, it inhibits you to such a level where you're not thinking about what happened yesterday, and you're not worried about, for example, what your test score was or something like that, and you're not thinking about the things you have to do in the future, such as all the homework you have to do, or these upcoming midterms or JPs or anything like that. Alcohol allows us to kind of sit back and relax, enjoy what's going on in the moment. And that's in a very real way, humans in control of that situation. But, as we all know too well, too much alcohol can lead to a state of drunkenness. I know. Too much alcohol can lead to a state of drunkenness. And we could kind of broadly define drunkenness as a state where you no longer have conscious control over what you say or do. Or at the very least, we could say you have less control over what you say and do. And as you would know, too much alcohol too often can lead to a state of addiction. And so essentially, the thing that's weird about alcohol addiction is not only can you not control what you're saying or what you're doing, but with addiction, you can't control when you're not able to control what you're saying or what you're doing. And in these circumstances, generally we'd like to think of humans being able to interact with matter on our own terms. But with alcohol and alcohol addiction, there's a very real sense in which the human is no longer able to interact with alcohol on his own terms. Rather, alcohol is, in a sense, controlling him in that situation. Alcohol is making him drink. He's addicted to it. So I like to call this alcohol's dark side. And here's some statistics on it. It's estimated that 18 million Americans are alcoholics. That's 1 in 12 people. And even more alarming is that the Center for Disease Control estimates that because 1/4 of Americans reported binge drinking last month, that 1/4 of Americans are at risk for developing some form of alcoholism in one way or another. So what can we do about it? Well, while I was a sophomore here at Princeton, I was in a neuroscience class. In that spring, we had an independent project that we had to do in this class where we had to research a drug of our choice. And so classically, all my classmates, they researched things like marijuana and alcohol and things like that, but I chose alcohol. And as I was reading and I was trying to figure out what's all the literature out there, what's the most recent literature and things of that matter, I came across a study called Dihydropyridine as a novel anti-intoxication medication. I know it's quite a mouthful. And I'll start saying DHM rather than dihydromycin. And in this study, researchers at the University of UCLA, what they did is they took this Asian herbal remedy where people would essentially take this plant, they would take the leaves of the plant or some part of the plant, and they would put it in hot water, and they would steep it, and they would form a tea. And then what they would do is after drinking alcohol, they would drink this tea, or the day after drinking alcohol, they would drink this tea, and they would report feeling better. And so what these researchers wanted to do is they wanted to see if there was any scientific evidence to that. So what they did is they took this plant, and then they boiled it down and found the active ingredient, much like caffeine is to coffee, the active ingredient. And then they started performing studies on this ingredient with rats in relation to alcohol. And what they did is they came to these 3 conclusions. The first was that rats given DHM showed no qualitative or quantitative signs of hangovers. Rats, when injected with the human equivalent of 10 plus standard drinks worth of alcohol, I know what you're thinking. I also would love to see what a rat injected with a human equivalent of 10 drinks worth of alcohol looks like. But an injection of DHM to the belly of a rat afterwards instantly sobered them up. And finally, rats given DHM-treated water never developed alcoholism, and alcoholic rats given DHM-treated water returned to a non-alcoholic state within a few weeks. And so I don't have this up here, But the way that this is working, without getting too scientific here, is that DHM binds to the same brain receptor that alcohol binds to, the GABA receptor. And by competing with that receptor, in the moment, if alcohol and DHM are both in the blood, it essentially means less alcohol can reach the brain. And also by affecting the receptor, without getting too technical here, it can reduce short-term alcohol withdrawal and tolerance to alcohol. So I already know what you're thinking, actually. So number 1 and number 2 are very interesting, right? As in, who wouldn't want to live in a world without hangovers? But number 3 is by far the most special and has the most positive implications. So let's check this out. So what this study is, as a background, is that they basically took 120 rats. And what they did is they put them into cages with food, water, and alcohol. And so they had food, a water bottle. The control group just had normal water, whereas the test group had water with DHM in it. And then finally, both groups had alcohol. And I know you're wondering, what kind of alcohol was it? Was it light beer for the college-aged rats, or white wine for the ladies? Or maybe even whiskey for these Texas rats. But sadly, it was just a diluted form of vodka. So sorry to disappoint you. And what they did is they basically just watched these rats over 10 weeks. On the left-hand column here, we had how much alcohol they're drinking as grams of alcohol over their kilogram body weight. So this way they could control for making sure a heavy rat wasn't drinking more alcohol. They measured it as a proportion. And then along the bottom, this is just time over weeks. And so what you can see here is if you look at the control group, just alcohol and water, basically they started off drinking about 2 grams per kilogram a day. But then within 4 or 5 weeks, they quadrupled how much alcohol they were drinking. And the researchers say they were full-blown alcoholics, limited only by the fact that they couldn't stomach any more alcohol without instantly getting sick. So full-blown alcoholics in the control group. Now, if you take the DHM group, which is represented by this black diamond, you can see that they just stay right along here at the x-axis. They're drinking right around 2 grams per kilogram a day. And this goes up and it goes down a little bit. But what's important to notice is that they begin the study and end the study drinking the same amount of alcohol. And the researchers said that they never started drinking more often or more frequently or greater amounts. They didn't develop any tolerance to alcohol, and they definitely didn't get an addiction. And then finally, in the third group, they essentially took half of the control group at week 7, and what they did is they divided them and started giving them DHM in their water. And what you can see here is that within 2 weeks, they reverted back to a non-alcoholic state. And so this is really, really interesting. And so what happened is I read this study, and I was absolutely amazed. And so what I did is I started talking to my neuroscience professor about it. And we started meeting regularly about it and discussing, what could its potentials be, and, could this work for humans, and things like that. So let's explore that. So you're thinking, but humans are different than rats, right? And the answer to that question is both yes and no. Rats, at the receptor level, are very similar to humans. And what I mean by that is when a drug affects the receptor of a rat, how it affects the receptor and what ends up happening is very similar to what happens in the human brain at the receptor level. But rats are different than humans in the fact that rats' brain structures look a little different, and humans make their decisions based on more factors. And so the way to think about this is by the biopsychosocial model. And so this biopsychosocial model can apply to anything. It can apply to acts, it can apply to addictions, and then specifically here we'll be talking about it in relation to alcohol. And this is a model that most psychologists and psychiatrists think about. And so basically what the biopsychosocial model is it's saying that humans don't make their decisions purely based on chemicals. It could be a combination of, it's a combination of social things, psychological things, and biological things. So, is this person in a work environment where people all the time go after work for drinks? Did they just lose their job and they're trying to cope psychologically with alcohol? Did they just go through a nasty divorce? Things of this matter. And finally, there's the biological aspect, which is, yes, the genetic component, but also what is the nature of the drug itself. And so, obviously, DHM, being a naturally occurring organic compound, it can affect the social or the psychological. But what it can affect is the biological aspect of alcohol. And so, essentially, I was talking with my professor, and we came to these conclusions. That one, for DHM could be used as a biological supplement to alcohol rehabilitation. And so what that means is that's basically saying that DHM, it can affect what's going on in someone socially, and it can affect what's going on psychologically. Those jobs are for alcohol rehab clinics to get to the bottom of that, and there's way more components to addiction than that. But what it is saying is that it could be used as a supplement to help cure this biological side. And then second, it could be used as a preventative measure for alcohol addiction when supplemented around the time of drinking. And so we came to these conclusions, and obviously we were both really excited. He got so excited that he ended up scrapping one of his lecture plans, and then he ended up giving a lecture on DHM instead. And what's funny about this is the week that he decided to do that also happened to be the week that Pre-Frosh visited the campus. So all of a sudden you have all these high school students and their parents, and we have a professor lecturing about alcohol, hangovers, and addiction. And so I got so excited about this, I started talking with him. How could we bring something like this into the world? How can we start acting on this now? And what happened is we came to the conclusion to start a product called Thrive Plus. And so the idea behind Thrive Plus, and I mentioned that I had a company, and we produced this product. And the idea behind Thrive Plus is that by marketing Thrive Plus, which is a combination of DHM and other ingredients, as an after-alcohol aid to be used primarily for the immediate effect of reducing hangovers, our hope is to chemically mitigate the addictive nature of the second most used drug in the world, which is alcohol. And so while this is my baby, and this is what my project has been over the past 2 or 3 years, I could go on about this all day, but I know time is short. And so what I would like to do is I'd like to put it in the context of what we've been talking about. And so what I would do is I would sum it up by saying this, that Thrive's goal is taming alcohol's dark side. And to put it in paragraph form, I would say that Thrive Plus's goal is to give humans more control over alcohol usage in such a way that, unlike Ayn Rand with cigarettes and the fire between her fingers, that the alcohol in our cups, which we think we've tamed for our own good purposes, won't come back to enslave us in the long run. Thank you.